Hey guys, so this tutorial is going to be covering caustic effects in Redshift and how to basically get them working. And so this is a pretty easy thing to set up in Redshift. All you got to do is just turn on a couple parameters and it's good to go. And so for this scene, I just have a basic glass shader. So let's start up an IPR. And so right now it's just a glass shader with a little bit of dispersion. So you're getting some cool little chromatic aberration in there. And also I have two metallic objects, just this rod and a sphere. And that's because caustics can also happen not only on refractive objects, but it's the light bouncing off of certain things that are like shiny materials and stuff show off caustics pretty well. So like these are kind of chromish colors, and then obviously refractive objects, which is the one everybody knows about. And so a lot of rendering engines don't use real caustics. They use kind of a pseudo softened caustic system. They don't do hard caustics. Like Arnold doesn't actually do hard caustics, and the reason is because it basically takes forever. It takes forever to do hard caustics in most render engines, especially the brute force ray traced caustics method. And so Redshift uses a point cloud method, which speeds things up dramatically for caustics. And so, yeah, I'll basically be showing you how to turn that on. And so, one thing to note about caustics is during the IPR phase, they do not work. You can't see them because IPR is all ray traced progressive rendering. It doesn't actually use any of the point cloud methods for making the caustics. So to actually see the caustics in effect, you have to do final renders or bucket mode, and that's just one of the limitations. So basically, all we have to do is, let's just pause this. Is first step is, what objects do you want the caustics to be hit? Basically, so let's move that out of the way. So if you have your objects, so we got these two objects, and you go under the mesh parameters under Redshift, you go to the bottom under visibility. Normally this is checked off, so you check that on, and then right here you have an option that says cast GI photons or cast caustic photons. You want to check this off. This is off normally when you first turn this on. And so if you want the object that you have selected to actually cast caustics, you check that off. So on this object, I already turned it on all these other objects. And so these objects are going to cast photons, caustic photons. And so now that the objects are able to cast them, what we need to do is make sure that our lights can do it. So let's open the light editor, and we'll just check. Right now this scene has two area lights and one dome light. The dome light, you could do it with HDR. You can turn on caustic photons, but they're usually HDRs. They kind of fire them all over the place. It's slower. It's generally not a good idea to cast caustic photons from an HDR. I've just found that that's a problematic thing, and it's slower. You're better off not turning it on for HDR dome lights. So I'm going to leave that off. But for the area lights that are in our scene, we have two of them. Once you click on your light, you go all the way to the bottom. There's this photon tab right here. So you check that off, and there's the caustic section. Don't worry about GI. This is if you're going to use GI photon mapping, and that's just an old deprecated system that really nobody really uses anymore. You use brute force or radiance cache, stuff like that. So the important thing for caustics, though, is here. You want to emit caustic photons. And so there's two sliders. The intensity multiplier, you want this at 1, basically means on. And the higher you increase this, it basically multiplies the brightness. So you can, let's say your scene's a little bright and you can barely see your caustics. You can bump this up and brighten the caustics so they stand out. So this is useful if you want a little more bang inside the caustics, so they're bright. And you have number of photons to emit. So this is basically the amount of photons that are being fired from your light and the quality. So if you have a lower number, it'll render faster. And at the same time, though, it'll be a little noisier and stuff. I generally find that this is a good amount, 5 million, but let's drop it down to 2 for now. And so Let's turn it on our second light. Drop that down to 2, just so we can do a comparison of before and after. And I'll do a comparison of the multiply. And okay, so now we've turned it on our objects that we want emitting caustics and our 2 lights. So the only thing left to do is now you go to the settings window, and so when you first open up your Redshift settings, you're going to go all the way to this photon tab, and in the photon tab you just check off enable caustics. For these settings, I just leave it all at default. The only setting that really I change is the search radius and the caustic photon number, the max. So normally, just for testing purposes, you could put this down to like 1 or 2, and it's going to be noisier. But since we're going to just be looking at it right now, for final render, go for 5. Yeah, I'd say about 50,000 is a good amount. And the caustic search radius, this is the way that it searches for the photons. And so increasing this helps it work basically, but it can also, both these parameters, just like we checked earlier on our light, they can increase render time. So just, be careful with that. Don't, go all the way to the end, otherwise you're going to be waiting forever. And let's just put this at, let's just leave it at 5. And so we've got 10,000 here for the max caustic photons, and for our light we have 2 million. And so let's move that to the side, and like I said, if we fire off an IPR, we're not going to see anything. There's nothing going on. And so let's pause that, and I'll save a screenshot so we can compare. And now if we do an actual render, a bucket render, and this will take a little bit longer because we enabled caustics. So right now it's actually in the background creating the photons that have to get mapped out. So this might take a little second. And once it's done, then you'll see it starting to do its thing. And so what it actually does is it creates a caustic photon pass before the irradiance cache or before brute force, before all that stuff. And so that takes a little while because it's a pre-pass. And so the higher you increase your settings, obviously the longer you got to wait. So here we go. We already have caustics. Boom. Just like that in our scene. And you can see the difference right there. So IPR, again, no caustics, so you have to actually render it. So if you zoom in here, we've got caustics on the ground. We've got this cool little color shifting, the hue shifting. The metallic objects are casting, and it's actually being cast inside of the object. And so that adds just a whole, whole lot more quality to it, to the image. But if you zoom in, there's a little spottiness. And so to get rid of that, and if you want, you can brighten it a little, the whole image, so you can see it. But generally in a dark light, it looks better. But like I said, you could actually increase the multiplier. So the multiplier, here we have the multiplier. Let's just do something crazy, like 5. So that's halfway to max. And let's do that for both our lights. So, and let's increase now our number of photons to emit to 5 million. So that's halfway also. So it's going to emit a lot more photons this time. So this is going to increase render time, while this is just going to brighten how they look. 1 is default. That's what technically is the most realistic, but for aesthetic purposes you can multiply it and have fun with it. And then over here we'll actually increase this to 40,000, and now our render times will be a little higher, but also the quality of our caustics will be nicer. So let's give that a shot. Let's actually save that and do another render. So this time might take a little longer. As you can see, it says down here photon mapping doing its thing, so you got to wait a little longer while it maps out all the pre-pass for the photon caustics, or the caustic photons, I mean. And yeah, that's really how easy it is to get caustics in Redshift. And you just turn them on basically on the objects and on the lights, and then make sure that your global redshift settings have caustics activated. And okay, here we go. So that wasn't too long, you know. I mean, it's for real caustics, that's actually not that bad. Caustics generally take forever to clean up also. And so now we've got the irradiance cache going, and as you can see, it's already way brighter, and that's just because I increased the intensity of the caustics to 5, which is way too much. But you might want to use this high of a caustic illumination if your whole scene is brighter. So if you're outdoors or something, you know, you can't really see them that well, so you might want to increase this. And so there you go. And now we have much smoother caustics, but they're just obviously brighter because I increased the intensity. And so let's say I actually, let's do an IPR, and I increase the GI light. So the dome light, now it's nice and bright, the scene. So if I had something like this, or maybe even a little lighter, let's go 0.5. That's maybe a little too bright. 0.2, 0.1. Yeah, so now the scene's extra bright, and normally with a intensity multiplier of 1, the caustics might not be visible. So under those circumstances, I'm going to drop the settings real quick a little bit, just so we can get a faster render this time. And let's bring this down back to 2, back to 2, 1, and 1 on our other light for the multiplier, and let's render. So you can see that if you have a 1 multiplier and your scene's generally well lit, you might have trouble actually seeing the caustics. They might be too faint. And so let's say you really wanted caustics, or your client wants caustics, or you know, aesthetically it looks, you wanted them to pop out more. That's where the intensity multiplier saves the day. And so let's see. So I mean, they're there. You know, they're in there. They're doing their thing. But see, they're pretty subtle. You know, they're still here, but the effect is really subtle. And so in a circumstance like this, you know, you might want to boost that up to 4. It still might be too bright, but you know, that's why you experiment. And so if we do another render, and now we have a multiplier of 4, we should be able to see them better. And so yeah, that's really all there is to it. You know, just click on your objects, make sure that the visibility tag is turned on, and that cast caustic GI is turned on. So just got to make sure, okay, you know, visibility's on, cast caustic photons is on. Same thing with your lights. Make sure your lights have emit caustics on, and finally just make sure your global settings have enabled caustics. And you see, now we have really strong caustic effects, and that's just because I increased the multiplier. But the scene itself is, you know, the lights themselves are lighting the scene naturally at the strength that I have them at. And so yeah, that's all there is to caustics. Thanks, guys.